The Witch, Time of Stillness, Year 3. As suddenly as it had come, the harsh rain had stopped, fading first back to the familiar beat of tiny droplets, and then finally vanishing altogether, leaving nothing but a fine mist that cast shadows through the trees and lines of dew amongst the leaves. It was beautiful weather, and as the days grew longer the sun sometimes seemed to make the retreating rains into tiny prisms of light, and if she had had the time, she might have just spent most days watching them. But they had been busy. So busy. Lorelei hadn't imagined herself the sort of person who enjoyed grand projects, but perhaps they were what had carried her forwards. After all, she hadn't had the time to really sit back and think to herself how far her journey had carried her. And yet, here she was, in a pleasant land that was being built up by her dear friends. Even with the concerns that Ruslana and Grendolf had, every day seemed like it might get a little brighter, and with hard work, maybe they'd leave the place a bit better than they found it. She still felt certain that things would turn out for the best, was determined to make it so, and that drew her mind back to why she was out here in the first place.
I don't get it. Why don't you just get the ingredients for witch stuff at a store or something, or ask that magical delivery guy to go get it? God. You're wasting so much time just gallivanting around here, you know. Oh, I definitely know, Dennis. I just suppose I see it as something I kind of enjoy, wasting time gallivanting around. Meh. I'll tell you what's a good way to waste time, online leaderboards. I've been kind of rocking them, not that you would know about it.
A brief pause in her ears alerted her to the Dark Lord yelling something, wherever he was, and she made a note to try surprising him with a visit sometime. Even if he absolutely, positively wouldn't take visitors, sometimes people like to know that someone cared. Even if they don't show it, after all.
Sorry, my sister was asking when I was gonna do the laundry. Heh. Little does she know, the answer's never. That's pretty disgusting.
Still, she couldn't help but laugh, because, well, it was also Dennis. He ignored her, and continued rambling on about some sort of game he had been playing with a dangerous and mysterious spider creature who totally needed his advice and guidance, which probably meant that Dennis wasn't doing so well.
Hey, Lorelei, do you have a moment, though? I mean, I don't want to disrupt your magical mystery stuff, but I also need to ask you something kind of important. Shoot.
Lorelei asked a little hesitantly, for she wasn't just gallivanting around, she had come to this particular section of the woods looking for something, a certain place not too far away where the air was thinner, and didn't feel quite right, and it almost felt as if you wandered around you might find something hiding amongst the branches.
If you've messed up when you're talking to someone, and you want to do a redo, kind of a save and reload kind of deal, how do you do it? Try apologizing, and then listening. You would be amazed how often that works out. Psst, that sound hyper dumb, you nerd. I'll think about it.
Leaves that shone like spun gold had fallen to the ground under the wheels of her chair, even with the rest of the trees in this place growing back to full and gilded beauty, and they had collapsed in a tiny and concentric circle, too, as if nature had mandated distance and boundaries for them in perfect harmony. Yep, that was weird enough that it just might be what she was looking for.
Good luck, Dennis. I'll talk to you later, okay? Are you going somewhere? Hopefully. Be careful, Lorelei. And good luck and stuff.
She smiled, but didn't reply, and held her hand skyward, trying to feel the air around her. It felt rather thin, perhaps like spider silk, or perhaps she simply couldn't get the idea of a spider playing games out of her mind. It was rather cute, but also a little distracting. Then, Lorelei felt the distinctive twitchy oddness of magic, and gave it a hesitant tug. The sky and ground opened up around her, and vomited up a sea of colors and anti-colors, and Lorelei blacked out. When she awoke, she had fallen off of her chair, her hat had fallen off of her head, and someone somewhat small and somewhat off-green was very meticulously piling the golden leaves up on the back of her head.
You're rather late, aren't you?
Mildred said, with an amused smile. The witch was hovering in the darkness, only for her mood, or possibly magic, to reshape the background into something resembling a series of porcelain steps. They reminded Lorelei a little of piano keys, if pianos had been built to climb.
Couldn't you at least make a ramp, or something? Though I may no longer teach you, that does not mean I am no longer your teacher. This, too, is part of your training.
Mildred cackled heartily, and floated up the steps, which Lorelei thought was cheating, as there were quite a lot of them. Still, she refused to take the easy route up, and only hovered a little, since any more than that felt rather like cheating.
Do you honestly think this friend? Acquaintance? Do you honestly think this acquaintance is important to the stuff you talked about earlier?
Mildred's reply was harsh, which didn't mean she was being cruel, necessarily. Mildred's attire was as worn and traditional as any witch could hope to wear, and her snarl was more snarled than her hair. But it was also who she was, and having someone who saw the world so differently than herself, was.
No. No, I do not. She is the kind who is always too influenced by the past, which is well and good unless you go for getting the future, bah. Seeing in both directions is quite difficult, but then again, it is better then to try to see than to go blind for lack of choice.
The building itself was a great library, and Lorelei wondered if it was an echo of a certain building she had seen, not so long ago. But it was grander than that, and at once somehow humble, and she had no clue whether either of those adjectives truly did the grand spires, flying buttresses, and oddly modern turnstile justice. Loitering around the entrance was a lady in blue. Lorelei immediately decided this must be Mildred's friend, or possibly acquaintance, and half rolled, half floated over before deciding to fall to the ground with a slight thump. The lady, who had magnificent wings, and they reminded her a little of a butterfly, gave her a very dour look.
What? Hello.
Offering up her best smile, Lorelei held out her hand, and the lady glanced at it dismissively before raising a styrofoam cup of suspiciously familiar beverage to her lips and taking a hearty gulp.
Do I know you? You don't look like the usual it crowd.
Crushing the cup and throwing it over her shoulder, where a mystical force utterly obliterated every atom of litter, for litter is next to murder, the unfamiliar woman, or possibly fairy, continued to glower, throwing her blonde hair back with a small snort. From the depths of one of her sweater pockets, Lorelei produced a small card, and handed it over with a smile. After having dealt with Dennis for so long, nothing else really fazed her.
Well, not yet. But I'd like to think I might be, or more importantly, that we might be friends.
Lorelei had worked rather hard on the card. She had gotten advice from Chow, and splattered pretty colors on it, and tried her best to find stars in the sky that were constellations she liked. And with the same bored expression, the blue-clad fairy woman threw it over her shoulder after crushing it like the cup, and it exploded into flames.
If you're lost or something, this place has gone downhill ever since they removed the dark food court. Well, you seem kind of cool, so we might meet again. Just don't try to show me up. That hat is a little too fashionable.
Seemingly satisfied, the woman flapped her wings, and flew off with grace and agility. Mildred continued to laugh long after they had entered the library proper. Thankfully, this place was as quasi-real as any other in Between Worlds, and so there had been no real casualty to Lorelei's handcrafted card. And, even though she had been rather crass, there was something kind of forward and impressive about the fairy lady, even if she hadn't actually turned out to be Mildred's acquaintance. Who was actually the librarian, supposedly. Which was good, because the place was entirely too large. Even as wonderful as all the books were, there was a feeling of dangerous welcoming here, one that seemed to say that you were welcome to stay, for as long as you liked. Even if that meant never leaving. Part of the welcoming feeling was the familiar and pleasant scent of tea, however. For all magicians took tea, it seemed, something that Lorelei was quite pleased with. The librarian in question was shorter even than Mildred, and seemed rather worn, too. She probably didn't leave the place very often, not that Lorelei blamed her.
Mildred,
said the librarian, with only an ounce of dispassion.
Liberal,
announced Mildred, with more than a few quarts of contempt. Liberal said nothing and sipped her tea quietly, and Mildred guffawed and held her cup, cracked and produced from some other realm entirely, for one had not been set out for her, to her lips, but did not drink at all. Of course, both of them were staring at her.
So, you're Liberal? I'm Lorelei. It's a pleasure to meet you. This place is all kinds of incredible. Do you get many people who come here, or is it kind of a magician's only thing?
The ice broke easily enough. It's hard to remain entirely aloof when your opposite has a warm smile, or so Lorelei had endless faith. Liberal chuckled darkly, and took another sip of her tea. Lorelei decided to follow her example. It tasted faintly and floral, with an incredible hint of something sweet that she couldn't put her finger on, for it was a taste she had never experienced in all her life, though it reminded her most of the condensed sugars back home that had tasted like a ghost of sucrose, long past.
We have many visitors. Some are magicians, but others are just capable of navigating here through their own power. All are welcome, so long as they treat the books with their proper respect.
Mildred interrupted with a snort, eyes narrowed.
Yes. For it would truly damage the spirit of the place if a book were to be returned late, or, toad's eyes and fallow fields, with a spot of coarse ground mustard oil against the cover.
Liberal shot the old witch a frightful look, and for a brief second Lorelei thought the two might actually come to blows, but she couldn't help but laugh, because it was so obviously something Mildred would do, and then refused to understand or apologize for. That was who she was, after all, and it was charming as it must have been aggravating to Liberal. Her laughter distracted both of them, and Mildred had the good grace to feign embarrassment, even as her teeth bared in a pleased smile. As for Liberal, the librarian was now watching Lorelei curiously, making no secret of her inquisitive gaze.
I think I may have been wrong. You seem quite the perfect fit for Mildred, though I am still sorry that anyone has to bear with her extreme, obtuse, archaic, and inefficient methods.
Mildred seemed quite proud of the hurricane of adjectives that Liberal threw at her, but
I don't mind them, actually. We get along well, and I'd say that Mildred is a truly vile and villainous bog witch who threatens me daily. My fear of her is only daunted by my respect for her power.
It wouldn't do to sell her own teacher short, after all. Once again, Mildred seemed quite pleased, and perhaps even sat a little more proudly in the patch of open space she currently occupied as a fine chair.
Well, that's not too bad, then. Of course, I'm not one for pleasantries. Unnecessary ones, that is. Mildred, ask your questions, so that I may get back to my work, if you will.
Liberal's work seemed to be some book or another. Lorelei stole a glance at it, noticing that the author seemed to be one Syraxade. The name didn't sound familiar, but somehow, even if it were a terrible idea, Lorelei kind of wanted to steal a peek at it.
Fine. You should pay more respect to my former apprentice, however. She is not some mere flibbertigibbet, this one. I would not have brought her here, if she was. So, then, to words. I had 3 questions, and you shall answer them. If I can.
Liberal now looked back at her, and Lorelei was keenly aware that for her tiny stature and somewhat hunched demeanor, the librarian was likely a powerful magician in her own right, even if that power was keenly wound up with this place, like some kind of guardian spirit.
What about you, then? Lorelei? Is it fair that your mentor gets to speak her mind, while you go silent? Oh, it's fine by me. But I can ask 3 questions too, if you like.
Somehow, she felt that a bit of the goodwill she had won earlier might have dissipated, but Liberal still seemed more bemused than annoyed, so there was that. Without holding back, Mildred immediately launched into her own inquisition.
The great dragons, Dragonov, Lazarus. They're not truly the most ancient things on the island, but merely fragments of fragments. Are they not?
Liberal shrugged, hands steepled upon the table.
They're quite old, but I'm fairly certain the most ancient thing on the island was you. Furthermore, even if that weren't the case, it isn't as if it remains stagnant, both you know this.
Did she? Lorelei had begun to foment an idea of her own, and wanted to waste a question on it, but bit her tongue back.
Pa, consider it an idle curiosity. Next question, would you state that the battle between the two is predestined?
This time, Liberal did not even shrug, her lips curled in minor but obvious displeasure.
Of course. There are prophecies about it. And we all know how foolproof and reliable those are.
Even Lorelei laughed at this, for even a new witch knew well enough that something that was destined to be was worth meddling in. However, Mildred's final question came at the tail end of her cackling laughter, and was so quiet as to be little more than ripples above the surface of her tea.
Is there no hope for the place, then?
Liberal did not respond for some time, and when she did,
there is always hope. Unless you are a bookless and uneducated crone of the swamps, in which case your hope has likely been under consignment far beyond my memory.
Mildred only smiled strangely, and chuckled in response.
Ah, yes. Perhaps in this case. Perhaps it has. Well, that sums my questions, and answers them well and truly. I imagine I know most everything that needs knowing, Lorelei. You may ask as you like, but I must return to my own works. As always, we shall meet again. Take care, Mildred. It'll be soon, too.
Lorelei held out her hand, and despite her best effort to look as if she cared not, Mildred did take it, briefly. And then she and the librarian were alone, and Lorelei realized with some horror that Liberal had managed to get hold of her card. Though she returned it, unfolded and with great care. She was truly a dedicated librarian.
This is very cute. You put a lot of effort into it, that's important. I cannot say I have heard of too many witches who carry cards, however. It is a little odd, peculiar, strange, and unusual. Not unpleasant, though. Ah. Thanks. I just felt, well, I've been meeting a lot of people recently, so.
Both sat and stared at their tea. It was clear Liberal wanted to get back to her work, and Lorelei had no desire to keep her. However, the steam rose up, prevented by strange and arcane forces from clinging to pages or even escaping all but the brief window of their vision. Lorelei sighed, and took another sip from her cup. It was such a pleasant taste, and she desperately wanted to waste a question asking what it was.
Candied hibiscus. The tea is too tart, otherwise. This way, it has the taste, without merely the sourness. Oh. Thanks, was it obvious? A little. It's only a courtesy, however. Most witches have a tea they're fond of, or several. You do not have to ask 3 questions. If you're having trouble, it was an arbitrary number, by your arbitrary teacher.
Still, a hint of fondness crept into Liberal's voice. It was hard not to grow fond of Mildred, for all her qualities. Indeed, because of them. However,
I do have questions, actually. I don't think she would have brought me along if I might not. Mightn't have them. And you would probably be disappointed if I didn't ask anything, right?
She couldn't be certain, but a slight smile might have passed under the edges of the librarian's face.
Go, then. The things that happen, while we're here, before we go back to our home, assuming we all make it. They'll only be permanent here, in a kind of fragment of a world, won't they?
Liberal sighed, and drained the last of her tea.
It depends on how you look at it, but yes. After that, perhaps the island is best imagined as being rolled back to a fresh state, and some of our thoughts and memories with it. All of them. Perhaps not all. More than that, I am afraid I am unwilling to say. It is quite a bone of ontological and philosophical contention. And I would not burden a new witch with such long discussions, as talented as she may be, at least not when time is of the essence. When isn't time of the essence? Wait. What we're doing, Lana and me, and Zhao, and all our friends, we're not actually hurting the world, are we? I had this weird feeling.
Liberal chuckled, quietly, and the sound was like the turning of a page.
Goodness. No, not at the moment. It could still happen, but it is what you do with your choices, more than what they are. Building roads and town isn't any more harmful than any other thing. Worry about your friends, for it is they who are in most danger. And I think with that, I shall return to the Herculean effort of attempting to categorize this entry.
Her audience ended. Liberal gave a soft, brusque bob of her head, and another quick smile.
You may come again, if you like. I do not mind the company, so long as you do not mind the occasional long quiet.
And then the library melted, and the colors melted with it, and once again Lorelei fought fear and nausea, and only just managed to avoid losing to them. It wasn't easy to get used to, the sudden travel between realms.
I don't know. She's been down in the leaves like this, just kind of wiggling. Isn't right, but it might be some sort of spiritual witch thing. I'm loath to trust it, but I guess I trust Lorelei, so I've got no choice.
Lorelei immediately awoke to the sound of conversation around her. Ruslana was talking to someone in the distance, who disappeared the moment her eyes caught his. That was Grendolf, though. Perhaps he had had this experience once, many lifetimes before, and gone to laugh in some pocket dimension of his own. Still, it was kind of embarrassing. Managing to pull herself back into her chair and shake off the fallen leaves with speed born of ruddy cheek, Lorelei gave Ruslana a large grin and a larger hug, which shocked her a little bit, but the soldier knew quite enough not to protest.
Hey, welcome back. How'd your journey etherwards go? I take it there's nothing new to report. A lot new to report, but mostly good. I think. We've got a lot of work still ahead of us though.
Ruslana reached up and unceremoniously pulled a fallen leaf from her brow, then flicked it into the air with a somewhat amused grin.
Yeah, we most certainly do. So, all this'll last, hey. Given the effort those cave dwellers VE put into their waymarkers, I figure it's only right we do the same. Well, then. The plan's still a go. If everything'll last. Even if it's not eternal, it has meaning. I can't say much more than that, because it's a complicated ontological bone of philosophical contention, or so I've heard. But there is no struggle that's without purpose.
Lorelei smiled at the visible relief that flooded over her friend's face. And even if it was only somewhat true, or merely unknown, her smile alone was worth it. Golden light had begun to match the leaves around them, as the season drifted towards an end, the quiet having been replaced with the almost burnished and liquid sunlight of the time of phosphor. Chapter end.